Good afternoon to all present here today. I welcome you all to this guest webinar on the topic addressing systematic corruption, analyzing core challenges and key instruments in the fight against corruption, organized by SPIL Mumbai in association with Transparency International Switzerland. It is truly an honor to have such an esteemed gathering here with us today. And on behalf of Government Law College Mumbai and the Students for the Promotion of International Law Mumbai, I extend a heartfelt welcome to all our distinguished guests, faculty members, and students who have joined us remotely. To our esteemed speaker, Ms. Katja Gloor, we are deeply privileged to have you join us today. Your presence adds immense value to this occasion, and we eagerly look forward to your insights and perspectives. Thank you so much, ma'am, for accepting our invitation. Uh, we will begin this auspicious occasion with the Saraswati Vandana, invoking the blessings of the goddess of wisdom and learning. May her guidance illuminate our path as we embark on this enriching experience.
Great. Thank you very much for having me.
शङ्कर प्रभृतिभिः देवैः सदा वन्दिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निःशेषजाड्यापहा विचारसार परमा आद्यां जगद्व्यापिनीं वीणा पुस्तकधारिणीम् अभयदा जाड्यान्धकारापहा हस्ते स्फाटिकमालिकां विदधतीं पद्मासने संस्थितां वन्दे तां परमेश्वरीं भगवतीं बुद्धिप्रदां शारदाम्
I would like to express our heartfelt gratitude for invoking the blessings of Goddess Saraswati, the symbol of wisdom and learning. May her grace guide us throughout this event and inspire us to continue our pursuit of knowledge. Talking very briefly about our institution, about Government Law College Mumbai, GLC Mumbai enjoys the distinction of being the oldest law school in Asia and has, since its inception in 1855, essayed a seminal role in the evolution of India's legal and judicial landscape. Any discussion of India's legal system and culture today is incomplete, in fact, meaningless, without a mention of Government Law College Mumbai. Government Law College, with its illustrious history and a heritage spanning over a century and a half, has nurtured some of the greatest minds of today, not only in the field of law, but in various other walks of life. Progressing further, about Students for the Promotion of International Law Mumbai, we at SPIL Mumbai strive towards taking legal studies to an empirical level and promoting law as an area of inquiry and study far beyond the realms of classrooms. We, as a student-based organization, seek to encourage communication and cooperation among students and lawyers internationally. SPIL Mumbai relentlessly strives to provide great opportunities for comprehensive studies of international cultures and legal systems to facilitate global interactions and to publicize educational and career opportunities in international law. Now, today, in recognition of the International Corruption Day, SPIL Mumbai is proud to host a thought-provoking guest webinar in collaboration with Transparency International a global leader in the fight against corruption. The topic for the webinar is addressing systematic corruption, analyzing core challenges and key instruments in the fight against corruption. Transparency International, or TI, is a global non-governmental organization that strives to combat corruption and promote transparency, accountability, and integrity in both public and private sectors. Founded in 1993, TI operates in more than 100 countries and works with governments, businesses, and civil society to fight corruption in all its forms. Its flagship publication, the Corruption Perceptions Index, is widely recognized as a leading tool for measuring the levels of corruption in countries around the world. Transparency International Switzerland, or TI Swiss, is the Swiss chapter of Transparency International. Founded in 2000, TI Swiss focuses on raising awareness and implementing strategies to combat corruption within Switzerland and globally. It advocates for stronger anti-corruption policies and conducts research to highlight corruption risks in both the public and private sectors. Talking about our speaker for the day, Ms. Katja Gloor, she is an accomplished professional with extensive experience in compliance, corporate governance, and international business law. She holds an LLM in international business law from the University of Zurich, where she specialized in international business transactions and technology transfers. Katja also completed the Fundamentals of Data Protection module at the University of St. Gallen, Switzerland. Her career spans various roles, including compliance officer at Siemens Smart Infrastructure and head of compliance at Siemens Schweiz AG, where she was instrumental in strengthening corporate ethics and compliance frameworks. Her expertise extends to contract management, claims management, and compliance consulting, having worked with Siemens Mobility AG and Siemens Schweiz AG. In addition to her corporate experience, Ms. Katja has also been a significant contributor to women's networks and diversity initiatives, serving as the head of women's network at Siemens Schweiz AG. Her commitment to advancing ethical business practices has made her a sought-after professional in the areas of governance and transparency. Ms. Katja's deep knowledge of international law, combined with her practical experience in high-level corporate compliance, positions her as a key figure in advocating for responsible business practices and transparent corporate governance. Her work continues to shape ethical standards with global organizations. Progressing further, about our principal ma'am, our esteemed principal, Srimati Dr. Asmita Vaidya, is a visionary leader, a skilled administrator, and dedicated educationist. With over 25 years of experience in the academic and social sectors, she has consistently driven impactful reforms and initiatives. Before joining Government Law College, Mumbai, Dr. Vaidya served as the head of the law department at NMD College, Gondia, and as the principal of Thakur Law College. Throughout her journey, she has excelled in diverse leadership roles, collaborating with faculty and staff to introduce innovative programs that enhance both academic and institutional growth. A gold medalist and university topper in both her undergraduate and postgraduate studies, she holds an MBA in Human Resource Management and earned her PhD in Industrial Law in 2009. Her accomplishments have been recognized through prestigious awards, including the Tejaswini Award, the Nation Builder Award, and the Top Educator Award 2022 by the Rhythm Group. Beyond academia, Dr. Vaidya is also a passionate social activist, working tirelessly to effect positive change and empower communities. Her leadership continues to inspire and shape the future of legal education at our college. Due to her academic commitments, Dr. Vaidya could not join us today. However, she sends her regards to all of us. About our faculty in charge, Ms. Rooprekha Chavria ma'am, she has played an instrumental role in supporting and guiding us throughout our endeavors. Professor Chavria is a distinguished academic and a dedicated mentor whose profound knowledge and unwavering commitment to the field of international law have greatly enriched our academic community. Her extensive experience and have inspired in their studies and careers. Under her guidance, SPIL has thrived, organizing numerous successful events and initiatives that have significantly contributed to the promotion and understanding of international law. Unfortunately, due to her academic commitments, Professor Chavria was not able to join us today. Nevertheless, her guidance and unwavering support have been instrumental in making this event possible. Talking about our assistant faculty in charge, Mr. Rohit Bokil, A highly respected member of our academic community, he graduated from ILS Law College in 2014 and completed his LLM from Savitribai Phule University in 2017 with a specialization in international law and human rights. Before joining GLC as an assistant professor, he taught public international law and its other branches at ILS Law College, Pune from 2018 to 2024. Mr. Bokil has published articles in national as well as international journals on varied themes of international law. He and has written daily for daily newspapers like Sakal and Maharashtra Times on different topics of international law. Mr. Bokil also frequently participates and presents at many national and international conferences and seminars. His areas of interest include public international law, international humanitarian law, international criminal law, international human rights law, and jurisprudence. Due to Professor Bokil's academic commitments, he could not join us today in this webinar. However, his support has been crucial in facilitating this webinar. Now, before we begin, I kindly request all attendees to hold their questions until the end of the session. We have allocated a dedicated time for a Q&A segment, during which our esteemed speaker, Ms. Katja, will address all your queries. We encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A box provided next to the chat box option. Now, with that being said, I ask Ms. Katja Gloor to address this gathering. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So for the great introduction. So I think I'll just have to share again briefly. Let me these technical challenges here. I'm not very familiar with the Google Meeting space, but here we go. I think now we're back. 1 second. Just make sure that you see all my slides. How does it look like? Yeah, can you see it now again? Perfect. Yeah, it looks good. So great. Thank you very much for having me. So my name, as you already said, is Katja Gloor. I'm currently the Managing Director of Transparency International in Switzerland. But as you know from my curriculum, I was a compliance officer for a very long time within Siemens on local and global level. So it's not only, let's say, the theoretical part I'm very familiar with in regard to corruption topic, but also really on a daily working basis throughout many years, which really helps me also today with my work within Transparency International. I think I'm very proud that I can talk to you today, which is a very special day, as you all know, right, that it's the Anti-Corruption Day worldwide. And therefore, I think it's just a perfect moment to really raise this topic again and really raise the awareness in that regard, because it's unfortunately a never-ending work, and therefore it really requires all our efforts to combat corruption on all levels. And I'm always happy to talk to people in the educational area, because it starts with the young and the youth. And as you know, that's also the motto, so to say, of today's Global Anti-Corruption Day. It all starts with the young people and the youth, because they are the future. And that's why we have to do the utmost also to combat corruption, also in order to make sure that all the young people also will have a good and great future with equality and fairness for everything they want to achieve. And I would like to go through a little journey of what corruption is about, what are the global means that are in place in order to fight corruption, but what it also means on a really local level in Switzerland, for instance, as an example, how we combat corruption. Even in a country like Switzerland, there is still some work to do to really achieve a good level free of corruption. And I think you did a great introduction. So therefore, there is not much I have to say. Now I have to see how I can switch slides. I try. Let's see how I get to the next page. I'm very sorry for these technical challenges. How do I get to the next page? No, I can share, but not. Here we go. Great. Now, And as you know, I mean, you already very well said it in the very beginning, so I don't want to make it too long again. Transparency International was founded back then, 1995 in Berlin. It was founded actually by a German man called Peter Eigen. He was back then director of the World Bank. And he was, during his work, really, he got aware of the devastating effect of corruption in developing countries, especially in East Africa back then. And he realized that corruption is not only a national topic, because back then that was the perception of it. So corruption is only a topic within a nation, but he realized, oh, it is so much a cross-border topic and it's an international problem. So that's why he founded back then Transparency International, to bring the topic of corruption on a global level and give it and really tackle this taboo subject of corruption and really start promoting global measures to fight corruption. And as you know, already said, we are active in over 100 countries with approximately 2,000 employees. And you know, the mission is really that we really want to stop corruption. We want to promote transparency, accountability, and integrity really on all levels in society. And of course, I mean, the vision would be one day that we have a world free of corruption. And this is really the goal we just keep chasing, and we never will give up on that, right? For the local chapter in Switzerland, to give you an idea, we're all also founded quite a long time ago. So this year it's like the 30th anniversary. We're also a non-profit association, and usually transparency is organized in, we have an office that is doing the daily work. That's what I'm doing currently or leading. We have a board that is responsible for the strategy. And then we have also an advisory board with a lot of great people having specific knowledge on certain topics, which really support us in a daily work when it comes to political statements, to media topics, to if we do research and reports. So we are embedded in a very good environment with a lot of experts surrounding us. And the financing is, we have membership fees. So there are a lot of companies that are members of Transparency because they're supporting our activities, and of course donations. And the approach, how we work as a Transparency, that's not only for Switzerland, but that's just as an example. We really go for close cooperation with all different levels on businesses, politics, administration, civil society, but also a lot of interaction with media, right? So we really work close with the media so that we also get a face in the public space, and that we can really also highlight our opinions and really enforce our vision. We do a lot of awareness training. As I said, we do a lot of reports and other instruments like guidelines, for instance, for companies, how they can tackle corruption in their daily business, and really foster exchange and really promote training. So really try to raise the knowledge, to raise the awareness, and increase the community in regard to combat corruption on all different levels. And we really try what's the also focus, and that I think is important to understand. As a small NGO, we always try to see where can we make the big change in fighting corruption. And Transparency itself sees it mainly also exchanging a lot with the business directly, of course, like with the private sector, but we want to have, or we promote effective legislation and effective enforcement. So that's one of the key pillars where we really focus on saying this is kind of a precondition that things can work, right? So this must be just stable and state of the art. And that's where we put a lot of effort in as Transparency. I mean, why do we have to fight corruption? I think this is nothing really new, and most probably the majority of you already know that very well, why we have to do it. And I think it's just important to understand that corruption is not a trivial offense. It's not just like a gentleman topic. Well, that can happen. It's really, usually it is a severe issue, and usually it has a systematic problem underneath, right? If there is corruption, it has usually really quite often there is a systematic problem behind it. And if it comes to corruption, then we usually talk really about also a conflict of interest situation as the basis, because there is like where personal interest just interferes with other interests, either on public or your employer, and it really outweighs your decision, right? Your personal interest outweighs your decision. And the problem of corruption is that it really interferes competition. It destroys competition. And if competition in a market is not working anymore, then you get real issues with innovation. And that's really a downward spiral for economies, which is really devastating. And we say as well that corruption is, and that's why it's such an important topic, it's the root of all evil, we say. It's really like the core and the backbone that destroys everything. It really undermines human rights on all levels. If it comes to education, if it comes to healthcare, it also undermines environmental sustainability. Just think of industrial pollution. If there is corruption, no one follows the rules and regulation in regard to environmental standards. So therefore, corruption and also, of course, money laundering is one of the, like, just after the corruption, you usually have also money laundering activities. So corruption is really the root cause of a lot of other bad activities and criminal offenses. And last but not least, we have really to keep in mind, or we know and we can see it, we observe it, that corruption can really endanger the foundation of democracies and really undermines the rule of law, especially when transparency and accountability take a backseat. That's just something that you can observe globally. That's why what we try also from Transparency International perspective, we try to give corruption a face, because the problem is corruption usually takes place in secret. No one sees it, it's hidden somewhere, but we try to bring it on the surface, we try to give it a face, we try to make it visible. We don't want to have it as a taboo, we want to talk about it, and therefore transparency is measuring corruption and also analyzing corruption. We have different means in place. I think the most famous one is the Corruption Perception Index, the CPI, which is published annually. And we have another one, which is actually measuring the perception of corruption, mainly the public sector. But nevertheless, that's where a lot of devastating things can happen if the public sector is not free of corruption. Then secondly, we have the Global Corruption Barometer. It's rather a public opinion there. We really ask direct, like the civil society, like human beings directly. It's not done on a very regular basis because it's quite the demanding work to do. But nevertheless, I think we did it the last time, 2019, globally. And usually when you look at this barometer, you see it's usually a little bit worse than the CPI in the same country. So then you realize the perception and what people really see and feel and in their daily life is usually even worse than what the overall perception index is. And then the third one is the Exporting Corruption report, which is very important for transparency because we're part of the OECD convention, right? So there the main focus in the OECD convention is really fighting for foreign bribery, corruption, and we tackle the problem of international business with the corruption combined. And this is also a very important report we look at on an annual basis. And then we also analyze global corruption reports. We look sometimes at specific areas like sport or education in some countries to really highlight specific issues in countries, or the National Integrity System report also helps to understand how local systems in country, how the capacity of the local systems are working, or institutions and sectors, to fight corruption. So these are the means we have in place to really give it a face and make it visible to the global community. And I think it also helps a lot for not only governments, those reports, but also for companies when they're active in markets, to understand a little bit better the environment they're in, and to really see the risks they may be facing when they do business in different countries. I would like to have a closer look at the corruption perception index, because that's the index we really look at really on a regular basis. And the problem is, yeah, it's not really getting better. So you see the map, the world map in the back, and where it's red, it means we have a lot of corruption, and where it's yellow, we have a little bit less corruption. But it's nowhere free of corruption. I think that's just a fact. None of the countries is free of corruption. So they're just different levels, of course. And unfortunately, over the years, the global average decreased. It didn't increase, so it's not getting better. It got even a little bit worse, as you can see. And we have to keep in mind that 80% of world's population really lives in countries where the index is below the global average of 43 points. So the majority of people live in countries where corruption is a really significant problem. And we can see over the last 12 years that 28 countries, they have improved, luckily, in the area of corruption, but unfortunately 34, they have a significant decrease in that. So it's a constant challenge we're facing. And I mean, the question is really, so why is it not getting better? So even we do and try to do a lot, right? But I think really, therefore, we have to understand a little bit the global context. And I mean, it is about global conflicts and crises we can see, because then we have instability, and where we have instability or where we have frequent change of government, it gets very difficult to implement long-term anti-corruption regulations that really counterfeit, so to say, activities that help to support fighting corruption. And also, if we see the gap between rich and poor, if that is getting bigger, that also boosts a lot of problem we see. And last but not least, which was really raised during last year's report by Transparency, but also on a constant basis, is really the judiciary topic is one of the key pillars that needs to be independent and free, that you can really combat corruption in a country. It's one of the key pillars, because a weak judiciary provides really a breeding ground for corruption. And the problem is, if corruption goes unpunished, that's the beginning of the end, everything. So corruption must be punished. And if it's not, then you don't have these consequences. And if you leave it unpunished, then it's really this downward spiral we can observe in many countries, unfortunately. And I mean, have an independent justice system is really a core element that we need to focus on. And this means the justice system must be free from political interference, so really operate independent on any political changes and instabilities. It has to be as transparent as possible. That means data must be open on judgments, on procedures, on rules, so that there is kind of, for media, for the civil society, that it is transparent to them how the justice system is working actually. And of course, also the integrity and monitoring mechanism need to be in place. So there need to be safeguard for justice systems or justice personnel as well, like whistleblowing channels, asset disclosure, and even fair salaries are really crucial that justice personnel can work independently and is not, how can I say, sensitive to corruption because the salary is too low, right? And of course, also in general, we have to make sure that access to justice is available to everyone, to the whole civil society, so that we have simplified procedures, so that this is working, that we have a civil society that can be involved in the justice system itself. And especially when we talk about corruption, we need to have, from a legal perspective, a very broad definition also of corruption victims, so that we also have the basis really to bring corruption to court and really tackle it in a justice system itself. So these are core elements where really Transparency International says we need an independent judiciary. We need to have a justice system that is transparent, that can really has integrity and monitoring mechanism in place, and that we really make sure that it's accessible to everyone, the justice system is a core element. I had a brief look at also India quickly to compare it just to Switzerland. Usually, of course, I have a main focus on Switzerland when we look at the CPI development. And as you can see on the left-hand side, we have Switzerland. We nowadays ranked on rank 6, which is very good, but we have only 82 points out of 100, which would be the maximum. So that means also in Switzerland, we have our topics. And as you can see, over the last 12 years, it was constantly decreasing in Switzerland, which is not a good tendency. And the three main issues that we see in Switzerland, for instance, and which we claim also as transparency, is always we have issues with transparency in political party financing still. It's now getting better. We had just launched recently a law that helps to bring in transparency, but just 1 year ago, it was just a black box on where the money comes from. We still have a big issue in regard to regulations of lobbying activities in Switzerland, meaning the legislative footprint is not transparent. So who is influencing actually the whole process when there is a new legislation on the way? And where we have a big issue in Switzerland is the protection of whistleblowers, where we really have weak regulatory environment for this protection. And when I had a brief look at India, of course, I think there is still room for improvement. But the good thing is, if you look at the tendency, it developed in a good way over the years. I mean, it's sometimes just a constant battle, right, to really get to the next level. And it is really a little bit the point that was, I was told by one of a very old and good friend in transparency, said, look, if once corruption found the way into a political system, into society, it's such a long and hard way to get it out again. So this is really just, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? It's a long journey really to improve the situation. So therefore, we just shouldn't lose faith because it's not happening in a year, but we really need to be constantly fighting for the next step. And three main points out of the CPI report last year for India was narrowing civic space was raised as a potential problem. They were highlighting one of the recent telecommunication bill that was, I don't know whether it was introduced or want to be introduced, where they saw threats for fundamental rights. And also, secondly, the weak anti-corruption measures was highlighted as it was said that despite there are existing good frameworks already fighting corruption, it's usually from the framework to the implementation, really the enforcing, that are two different steps where there need to be improvement as well. And the judicial challenges as well. There is a good judicial system in place, but sometimes you can observe delay and inefficiency, which could help to timely prosecute corruption cases, and that could foster to a certain extent the culture of impunity, where they see transparency sees a potential risk. So this is at a glance what the CPI brings to the surface now for the countries Switzerland and India for just for the moment. But what I would like to say, so it's a little bit busy, the slide, but I help you to understand what I try to show you. Even, and that's exactly the problem of corruption of the international level. Even, for instance, in a country where, in Switzerland, where the corruption level is low locally, we are exporting corruption. And that's the problem, right? That's why we have to tackle corruption always in a cross-border context. And as you can see, the upper graph shows that was a study done by the University and Transparency International in Switzerland. And in the upper graph, you can see the markets that are important to Swiss companies, right? Exporting goods and services. And also you can see Asia is really an important market. And I think also Switzerland and India has a very active exchange in exporting products and services. And on the lower graph, you can see the situations where Swiss companies were required to pay certain bribes or to give certain gifts in situation. And where it's red and orange and pink, that's where they were asked in that situation. And I mean, it's obvious situations like when it came to the situation of awarding contracts by private sector in the private sector or awarding contracts in the public sector. Typical situation where you could there could be a request to pay something, but also government licenses and authorization is usually a vulnerable point where you can be confronted with corruption. Goods handling at ports, airports, very typical situation, but also controls by the police or other government offices were raised as a problem in different countries. And also, of course, what we also observed back then in my work with Siemens, customs clearance, really, when you need to bring your stuff over the border to another country, but also in situation where you pay taxes. So this is the situation where Swiss companies paid bribes. And I mean, just to give you the reasoning, what Swiss companies said back then when we asked them, they said, well, I mean, we're active in markets where the corruption risk is very high. That might be true. And they said, this is just a standard. It's a business standard. You don't do business if you don't pay. And that's why also 25% of the Swiss companies said, well, most probably we lost contract because other competitors were paying bribes. But they also raised the problem, hey, if we do business abroad and the bureaucracy system is very complicated, that also increases the likelihood of paying bribes. And also working through local parties, third parties, that also increases the risk. What we also see, and I think this is also a core element, mainly now for the private sector to keep in mind, is really one of the most effective instruments to fight corruption in companies is that they really have an ethical culture in place and a zero tolerance culture, where there is really not maybe culture. And this also reduces the risk, and that's, I think, important to get even the question to pay a bribe. So if someone is aware that a company has a very strong ethical culture and a really strong zero tolerance culture, it really decreases the likelihood that you get requests to pay bribes because they know already that it gets difficult to get the money. And it's really anchoring the measures really in your culture, in your company culture, and not have it as a pure formalism, just you have a nice guideline, but nobody knows about it. Nobody is even, living according to the guideline or doing business according to the guideline. And from a Swiss perspective, we said, well, I mean, we're active in countries exporting stuff also to India or to other countries. And we say also as a transparency measure, okay, I mean, there are two main instruments, we say from a legal perspective, how we can combat that, despite that the company itself foster an ethical culture. But from a criminal law perspective, we say on one hand, we would like to, and that's something we're currently trying to lobby for, that we have this legislation in place, that companies can really do a voluntary disclosure and have a legal security, or what will happen with them if they voluntarily disclose that they are involved in a corrupt system. Because that's, as I already mentioned, the core problem. Corruption is something that happens in secret. So you have to find instruments, how you bring it on the surface, how you give it a face. And giving a company that is involved in a corrupt system, how can you now motivate such companies to get out of such a corrupt system? That's when you tell them, okay, if you let us know that you are involved in a corrupt system, we give you security, how we will handle you from a legal perspective. And if you really follow the rules, we will decide on what you have to do, like you have to pay a certain fine, you have to have a good compliance system in place, and so on. If you follow all these rules, then you may be free of a punishment. And that could really help to bring those cases into light, right? That it gets transparent. And the other thing is really that we have to strengthen criminal enforcement. As I said, if corruption is not punished, that's really a bad mechanism. We have to make sure if you get caught with corruption, it has severe consequences, also for a legal entity, for a corporation. I mean, a lot of things already happened, right, on a global level. And apologies, this is a little bit of focus also on the OECD and EU level, because that's the market I mainly focus on. But there are also international standards, of course, that are relevant to the fight of corruption. I mean, coming from the OECD guidelines, I mean, also, I would like to expand it here a little bit, coming not only corruption, but also the money laundering topic. I mean, we already had the Financial Action Task Force in place more than 30 years ago, where, and that was interesting, money laundering was tackled before actually corruption, because it was easier to tackle. And back then, the global community had a main focus on tackling drug trafficking and the organized crime. And that was just the initial point, really, to fight money laundering. And it took a while to understand that corruption is, so to say, just happening before, right, the money laundering. That's why you have to tackle it as well, because it's kind of a root cause of the problem. And also the understanding of having an international problem in regard to corruption took a while. But over the time, there were a lot of conventions released, which is really good, and which have also some which are legally binding to those nations who actually signed the contract, like also India on the UN Convention Against Corruption, and Switzerland signed all conventions on the OECD, on the Council of Europe, but also the UN Convention Against Corruption, the UNCAC, which we celebrate today, right? Because it was signed back then, 2003, on the 9th December. That's so to say the initial date of the World Anti-Corruption Day. And last but not least, what we have to understand, and I think what is really good to see, is that on a global level, the understanding is grown that corruption, as I said already several times now, is the backbone of a lot of problem, and really is a problem for a sustainable economy and for peace. And that's why under the Sustainable Development Goals, number 16, yes, promoting a peaceful and inclusive society for a sustainable development, not only environmental sustainable, but sustainable overall, provide access to justice for all, and build effective and accountable inclusive institutions at all levels. If you go into the details, you see that corruption is really highlighted as one of the core elements that need to be reduced substantially in order to achieve these goals. So fighting corruption is fighting for peace. So this is really something that we have to understand, and which is here nicely anchored in these overall global sustainable goals. I mean, if we have, and why we're celebrating today this Anti-Corruption Day, the UNCAC recommendation, so the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, is based on 5 main modules where they're looking at more in detail. They say you need to have, as a society, as a government, you need to have preventive measures in place for both public and private sectors. You need criminalization and law enforcement, because, as I said, it needs to be you need to punish wrongdoing. Of course, you need to have this international cooperation, because otherwise you're not going to combat corruption sustainably. Also, the asset recovery is a core element. So if there are assets illegally obtained, you need to make sure how you get them back, because that's not money that belongs to a company who actually got the money because they with corruption. And of course, the technical assistance and information exchange, also a very important element, that we have a great or better exchange of information when it comes to corruptive systems, because they're very complex, as I said, cross-border. So that includes different judicial systems, and therefore we need to make sure how we communicate, how we exchange information. And for instance, if you look at the UNCAC recommendations for India, I had a brief look at that as well. These are not all of the recommendations, but to pick out 3 of them just to get an idea. You signed the contract as a country, you agreed to bring that into law, into national law, and to tackle that. So these are the recommendations where you still can work on. This is really the stronger legislation in criminalizing the bribery of foreign public officials. That's one of the elements. And I think India is a very active exporting nation, so that would make very sense to have there a strong law in place. But also the asset recovery part, because that's where it starts to get painful for companies, right? If they lose the money they received through corruption, it's not very attractive anymore to gain contracts and turnover through corruption if you're going to lose that money again if you get caught. And also the active participation in international data exchange, that could be something where India could improve also, as you are also very international active country in exporting a lot of services and goods around the globe. So that's where we have the systematic of the conventions, which are signed by countries, and they give you on a regular basis recommendations, which gives you good guidance to see where do we need to focus on, where do we still have a problem. And that's also how we work as transparency. Just to have a brief look at that as an example for Switzerland, because we're also not free of recommendations, of course, because also we get regular reviews. So for instance, from the OECD convention, which we signed as well at Switzerland, as I said, UNCAC is more the really global convention for combating corruption, right? It looks at all sectors, all nations, so it's really the instrument. And the OECD was really looking mainly back then at this foreign, the bribery of foreign public official in the international business for those 44 member states in the OECD. Whereas India is a very close collaboration partner and also may have a look at the OECD recommendations. It's very similar build than the UNCAC, so I don't want to repeat that. And for instance, Switzerland gets also on a regular basis recommendations like we need to improve the sanctions for corporations. So the punishment part is too weak in Switzerland. And legal protection of whistleblowers, as I said, need to be increased. That's also from the OECD. And also we should increase some part of the transparency if it comes to penalty orders, which is not it's not transparent enough for the civil society to understand what happens there. So these are good instruments to really foster your fight against corruption. Last but not least, the FATF, money laundering, I mean, closely connected to corruption, you know, and especially in Switzerland, it's a painful topic over decades already. And we're struggling really to implement those global standards and recommendations coming from the Financial Action Task Force. We actually a member state of the FATF. We also actively participating in creating those standards, but we're still too vulnerable to money laundering in Switzerland. And we still have the problem that we don't have sufficient compliance by the financial institution for the due diligence and reporting requirements. That's where we really face still very weak points. And some high-risk areas are still, from a legal perspective, not sufficiently regulated. If you look at the three blue boxes, these are the claims or the requirements also coming from Transparency International, saying these are main things we need to adapt in order to fight money laundering really actively in Switzerland. And one thing is really transparency for in the beneficial owners and the extension of the Money Laundering Act. And these are two main FATF recommendations where we're struggling now over years to really implement this. There's a lot of pressure against it to create this transparency. Sometimes it's really the question, why? But unfortunately, I think because money laundering is still a business that is where you can make money in Switzerland, unfortunately. I have to say it that way. Because if the punishment is not that severe, then you still do it. If your risk appetite is too high and you say, okay, I'm going to earn that much money if I still take kind of black money or money, and from time to time I have to pay a fine, but it's still like a plus on the bottom line, then it's not the effect that it needs to have in order to really fight money laundering effectively. And therefore, we want to increase the transparency, which really forces the financial institutions to really do their job, do proper due diligence, have proper risk analysis in place, and really follow the international rules. And that's ultimate beneficial ownership register that is transparent to everyone, and that we are extending the law that includes all those gatekeepers, like also lawyers, which when they do their consulting job, when they start establishing trust companies, if they have red flags in place, they need to, they have some due diligence to do in order to make sure that there is no money laundering activities behind it. So this is really still, we're getting there. That's why it's already green, but like including lawyers, for instance, which is one of a core recommendation, we're already struggling again whether we want to have it really as a law or not. So you see, it's a constant political fight, and therefore it's so important to have NGOs in place like Transparency International that can be active, because we raise it, we bring it to the media, we write reports about it, so that we keep the pressure high also on the government to really solve this problem on the long term. And just to bring it down, I mean, as I said, this is where the long way we all come down to what is transparency actually doing locally, and now for instance here in Switzerland, but I think that's valid for any chapter around the globe. We have these reports, we have this convention that gives a lot of recommendation that really looks closely at corruption problems in specific countries. And we try to adapt it and really make a strategic program locally where we start fighting it. We have a section that we call integrity in the public sector. We have a section called integrity in the private sector, and where we really try to tackle specific topics like political financing, regulation of lobbying, where we really try to push legislation, but we also influence and push, for instance, the anti-corruption strategy on federal level for Switzerland. And on the anti-corruption legislation part, we foster to really improve the corporate criminal law, like we try on the money laundering legislation side. We try to implement the FATF recommendations. So we take those recommendations and we really push them forward as much as we can in order really to approach corruption on a systematic level in the country. Last but not least, I mean, if you combat corruption, as I said, you stand up for so much more than only fighting corruption. You stand up for environmental sustainability, overall sustainable economy, for equality and fairness, for strong institutions, for human rights, for rule of law, for the democracy. In the very end, you stand up for peace. And that's why I think it's worth it to do it every day. And I think that's it for the very moment from my side. So thank you very much for listening to me. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. And also later, you can always send me an email if there are some things you would like to know or you have questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Katja Gloor, for such a compelling and insightful presentation. Your expertise and nuanced perspectives on combating corruption and fostering transparency have certainly given us much to reflect on and discuss. Especially, I must say that your ability to break down the complex challenges painstakingly in the context of both Switzerland and India, and how you have outlined actionable strategies has truly enriched our understanding of this critical subject. On behalf of everyone here, I extend our heartfelt gratitude for sharing your time and knowledge with us. We will now certainly transition to the Q&A session. And as I said at the beginning, I request all the attendees to submit your questions in the Q&A box, and we will address them shortly.
Okay, perfect. You want to address it now or later? Or some?
We'll do it right now. We're just waiting for the questions that if anyone has.
Okay. Let's see. Someone has a question. And as I said, happy to answer. There's a hand raising at the.
Yes, I request the attendees to kindly put the questions in the Q&A box. We'll take it from there on.
Okay. Oops. Can you still? No, it's black. Can you? I unfortunately don't see where I can see the questions.
Actually, the box is not enabled.
Just a second, we'll get that fixed. I believe the option is now available for all the attendees.
Okay. I try to see whether I can read them somewhere.
That's all right, ma'am. I'll just tell you the questions. We have our very first question here already. Someone has asked, what are the ways to combat corruption at ground level?
What are means to at the ground level? You mean like really on a daily basis, so to say? Or what do you understand on ground level? Just to understand you properly, the question.
As I understand it, I believe perhaps on a daily basis.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think it really. I mean, I think I would distinguish between the private sector you face and there where you have interaction with the government. I mean, from a governmental perspective, I mean, wherever you come across corruption, I think, as I said, wherever you see that, you need to speak up in order if you are involved in corruptive activities because you have to, or you see corruption in connection with the governmental sector, you need to speak up. Either you get a chance to escalate it to an NGO that can help to tackle the problem more on a systematic approach, or you really bring it on a legal level, so to say, in front of a court, because it needs to have consequences. If we all remain part of a system that runs on like this daily corruption, it will never change. And then, of course, where media and the civil society needs to really take a strong role, like what we do, for instance, is really include media in fight against corruption, where they help to bring things that go wrong, make it transparent, bring it to the surface. And on the private sector, I really have to say, like, my work back then was really that we as compliance officer in companies really make sure that we have an ethical culture and really a zero tolerance culture, where you as a company, you do not tolerate any form of corruption. And it always starts with the tone from the top. That's really within a company, but also on the governmental side. You really need to have this tone from the top saying, what is the direction? Because otherwise it's getting very, very difficult to fight corruption in any level below that. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your perspective. I believe that answers that question. We have another question. Someone has asked how to combat corruption when people believe to prioritize their work through shortcuts over ethical processes.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key problems, that still what we see, that the short-term profit sometimes overrules the ethical aspects. But I'm truly convinced, and this is also what study shows, that you will have a better and more sustainable success, for instance, in your company, if you really follow an ethical standard, and if you don't do corruption. Because corruption, I mean, that can work for quite a while if no one realizes that you are involved in a corruptive system. But you have, I mean, getting caught is one aspect. Then one day that you will have a problem with the criminal law, where you get punished and where you maybe also face tremendous reputational problem. And I think these are main arguments to say being compliant, have an ethical culture, really means having sustainable success as a company, because you're not always having the fear that you get caught, that you are in court, that you have reputational problem. And also remember, a corruptive culture in a company doesn't bring out the best of the people. It has a lot to do with pressure, with uncertainty, and it really hinders to be innovative. So if you really want to be truly an innovative and sustainable company and have a sustainable economical success, then you have to fight corruption, because one day it will get back to you like a boomerang, and you will pay all the bill for all the short-term gains. You will one day will get it back, and I think it's not worth it at all. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. I think that really answers that question. We have, well, actually two questions, but I would say that they are twofold, a part of just one single question. Someone has asked, firstly, do you think that India can become corruption-free looking at the present trends? And secondly, what should be the foremost anti-corruption measure in India?
Good question. I'm unfortunately not that deep into the situation in India, so apologies for that. But I think to get really corruption-free, well, maybe that's a vision which we don't even achieve in Switzerland. So I think let's formulate the goal like that. You want to just make sure that you're going to improve it every year a little bit. So I think just focus on the tendency, make it better. I mean, I think that's a lot. As I said, it's a long journey. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So if we one day will be able to have a world free of corruption, unfortunately, I doubt it, to be honest. But I truly believe in that we can make it better every year. That we have at least a level which really allows to have a fair and equal society, where we have really also a sustainable economy. But really focus on the small steps on every year, and really keep the tendency in focus, and never give up. And what is the most important instrument for India? As I said, maybe I'm not too deep in that. I mean, what I can do is also to look it up a little bit and give you some broader answer on that. But as I said, I try to pick out some of the recommendations. And I think also for India, it would be really great that that we look at the systematic approach on a governmental and legal frame, saying we need to make sure, for instance, that the basis already is working, that we have, for instance, good laws in place that really, where you can address, at least from a legal perspective, all corruption topics, like corrupting foreign public officials, that all these laws are in place. And then the second step is really, if we look into the enforcement. And if we look into the enforcement, we really need to have the judicial system in the focus, where we need to make sure how can India make sure that the whole legal system, that the judiciary system is independent and transparent as possible, and really take it step by step. Make sure laws are in place. Next step, how can you improve the enforcement, and really make sure that you have the transparency and an independency in all those systems. Yeah.
I think that definitely answers it. Well, we have last two questions for the day. Firstly, someone has asked, will de-dollarization in bilateral and multilateral trade between developing economies help reduce money laundering?
Sorry, I didn't understand the first part. What will help reducing the money laundering?
De-dollarization in bilateral and multilateral trade between developing economies.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know whether I can answer this properly. The de-dollarization. I don't know whether that has the biggest impact on this. I think, to be honest, what are the core elements to really combat money laundering is that all market players are, from a legal perspective, involved in combating money laundering. That means that we have that every part that is potentially involved in the chain of money laundering really has a duty of due diligence and really has a duty to report if they come across something. And as I said, it's not only the financial institutions, it's not only about, it's also about, as I said, the lawyers, but anyone who deals with goods and services, like a company, as I said, like Siemens, has to be involved in the fight against money laundering. So I think it's rather about the systematic 360-degree approach of combating money laundering, because also money laundering usually involves very, very, very complex systems. And we see also an increase in so-called trade-based money laundering, meaning that we have more money laundering based on trading, where you try to bring money from one country to the other. So therefore, we need to have customs, we need to have companies, we need to have lawyers, we need to have all financial institutions that play a crucial role in combating money laundering, that everyone has a legal duty to do their due diligence and really report in case they come across red flags. I think that I would say is the most effective, or would be the most effective way to combat money laundering. Yeah. I hope that answers to a certain extent the question.
Yes, that is a great perspective on how countries can reduce money laundering per se. We have another question. Someone has asked, is cashless economy an effective measure to combat corruption?
Cashless. Oh, that's a good question. Unfortunately, we do not observe up to now any impact, especially if we look into countries where they already live, so to say, cashless. So it didn't have a tremendous impact. But I think, unfortunately, there are other forms that help also to keep corrupt system running, even there is not more cash in place. But maybe it could influence certain areas of corruption in a daily exchange. But overall, we did not observe any changes in countries where you don't have, like, which they're really, so to say, almost cash-free, especially when you look into the Scandinavian countries in Europe, where they mainly, that was not a big impact, but could be that we have that more on a daily basis, that it lowers this so-called facilitation payment, these payments which you really give to make things run smoother in a daily interaction. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Interesting questions. Good question. Thank you. Yeah.
And we have one final question.
It's asked, what are the implications of corporate liability for corruption, and how can companies mitigate this risk?
Well, as I said, corporate liability is a really relevant element of fighting corruption, because I think really a legal person is as reliable as a natural person for corruptive activities. So therefore, there must be a liability, or there must be just a legal person must be liable for corruptive activities. Usually, it's always like that. If you look at any global law related to corruption, also the very famous FCPA from the US, whenever you have a good compliance system in place, where you really show that you did everything according to your business, your markets, your risk you're facing as a corporation, that you have established a proper compliance organization, that you have established proper procedures and guidelines, and really that you cultivate a culture of integrity, then this is the best way to really protect yourself as a company in case there is a corruption scandal even in your company. And I think it really helps you also to avoid as a corporation, or to have the risk that, for instance, a systematic corruption system can grow in your company. We have to be realistic. Even if you have the best integrity culture in your company, you have the best compliance system in place, all rules, regulations, and procedures, there is not 100% guarantee that you can avoid corruption, but you can at least avoid a systematic approach, a culture of corruption. And I think this is which if it's the British UK bribery act, if it's the FCPA, also the Swiss laws, for instance, if you can show to a court in case of corruption that you have done everything to avoid such a corruption case, that's the best protection you have. And also from an integrity perspective, I think it's mandatory to have it in place.
Thank you, ma'am. I think that answers that question.
Good.
I believe we have come to the end of this Q&A session.
Right.
Thank you to everyone for your insightful questions and for your active participation in the Q&A session. I really appreciate the engaging discussion and thoughtful contributions from all the attendees. As we come to the close of this session, I would like to extend our sincere thanks once again to Ms. Katja Gloor for her valuable insights and for addressing all the questions with such depth and clarity. We now conclude the Q&A segment, and with that, I would like to wrap up today's webinar.